Eliza Marlowe was balancing a tray of coffee when her phone vibrated. The screen displayed no name, just a stark black pentagon. No ringtone, no sound, only a discrete, pulsing symbol. At a table near the center of Camp Tellerman's South Mess, Colonel Dean Halverson paused mid-sentence. Surrounded by 3 junior officers, he barely looked up. "Don't answer that," he said flatly. "You're just cafeteria staff." Eliza didn't respond. She set the tray on the counter, wiped her hand on the side of her apron, and lifted the phone. Her voice didn't waver. "General Marlowe speaking." Every sound in the room vanished. Forks hovered, pens froze. Private Rory Tamsin, scrubbing trays near the dish pit, stood motionless. Then came the voice from the line, measured, urgent, unmistakable. "Ma'am, we have a developing situation. Mediterranean fleet reports irregular vessel movement. Sit room convenes in 10. We need your assessment." In that instant, a dusty dining hall on the edge of the Arizona desert became the last place anyone could pretend not to notice her. Maybe you're listening to this from a noisy subway, or watching from a quiet neighborhood cul-de-sac. You've probably witnessed someone dismissed for the way they looked or the job they were assigned. Maybe you've even felt it yourself, but you've never seen it play out like this. Not when a room full of decorated officers realized they'd misjudged the one person none of them had bothered to truly see. Eliza Marlowe had made invisibility look effortless. At 45, with sun-marked skin and a steady gait, she blended in without trying. Her uniform was plain: khaki pants, a white polo with Camp Tellerman Volunteer Services stitched neatly above the chest. Hair tied back, face calm, her movements had the quiet efficiency of someone used to staying behind the line. No one had any reason to imagine she was anything more than a volunteer, and that was exactly how she intended it. What they didn't know, Eliza held one of the most critical commands in the U.S. military. A 3-star general responsible for multi-theater strategic operations. A senior advisor to the Joint Chiefs. A trusted voice in national defense briefings most personnel would never even hear about. Her office in the Pentagon, located just steps from the Secretary of Defense, housed restricted material capable of shaping global posture. But once a year, for 2 weeks, Eliza stepped away from all of it. And instead of flying to conference summits or walking security corridors, she picked up a mop, tied on an apron, and showed up somewhere like this. Not for optics, not for charity. She did it to remember. Because years earlier, under a canvas roof in Helmand Province, a woman named Patricia Haysthen, a brigadier, now a 4-star, had told her something that never left her. You can't lead people you don't understand. And you won't understand them unless you walk through their daily life. That's why Eliza came to Tellerman. No insignia, no aids, no speeches, just a scar on her right wrist from a long-ago explosion. A plain black bracelet that read, OEF, Echo Watch. And a notebook in her head where she recorded everything what people said when they thought no one important was listening. That day, nobody knew who she was. But when the call came, the illusion fell away. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain. She just took the call. And in doing so, revealed everything. What happened next? When the officers realized what they'd said and who had heard it? We'll tell you. Subscribe to follow the next chapter of this real-life story about judgment, authority, and the kind of leadership that doesn't need to be announced to be felt. Stay with us. 2 decades earlier, a convoy shattered in southern Helmand. Smoke curled from twisted steel, and dust hung in the air like ash. First Lieutenant Eliza Marlowe pressed gauze into a corporal's thigh while blood soaked her sleeve and static barked through a jammed radio. One more second, and the call would have been too late. One more blast, and no one would have walked away. The wound on her right forearm never quite faded. Neither did the memory of being left with a single choice: stay calm or lose everyone. Years later, long after medals and maps and walls of redacted briefings, Eliza kept something that most officers lost proximity. She never forgot what it smelled like under Kevlar at 122 degrees, or how long chow lines felt when the last flight in dropped rations short. She rose through the ranks with precision, planning operations across multiple theaters, briefing Joint Chiefs, directing assets whose names never made it onto paper. By the time her uniform bore 3 silver stars, she had more authority than most senators. But every August, she disappeared. No motorcade, no press detail. Just 2 weeks, always exactly 14 days, where she would show up in places like Tellerman, wearing nothing that gave her away. Camp Tellerman sat along the dry spine of the Gadsden perimeter, a wind-blown post surrounded by cracked gravel, chain link, and sunburned storage units. The mess hall, a square timber structure just wide enough to hold 60 soldiers, baked under late summer heat. Inside, fans buzzed against dry ceilings, trays clattered, and conversation rolled in waves between bites of powdered eggs and reconstituted potatoes. Eliza arrived on a Monday, signed in, washed up, put on the white polo with volunteer services stitched beside the collar. Her bracelet black rubber, stamped with OEF, Echo Watch, rested against the scar from Helmand, faded but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. No one did. She didn't speak unless needed, worked methodically, wiped tables edge to edge, rotated coffee filters before the second alarm sounded, noted which bins overflowed early, where the air conditioning failed during the second shift, where boots dragged from fatigue, and where laughter died faster than it should. Not one soldier guessed who she was. Private Rory Tamsin had just turned 19. A new intake from Dakota Company. He'd spent the past week on KP duty peeling potatoes, mopping after hours, watching for ways to stay out of trouble. He noticed her by the second day. She worked differently than the others. Her movements were clean, controlled. She didn't waste time, didn't fumble, didn't fill the silence with stories. Everything had intention. During a lull between trays, while she was scrubbing down the utility sink, he approached. "Ever serve, ma'am?" he asked. She rinsed her gloves without looking up, dried her hands slowly, pulled one towel from the stack and folded it, then turned, smile small but sincere. "A little," she said. "Nothing else." He didn't press. Back east, someone was likely paging every aide they could find, trying to locate a general whose whereabouts weren't filed in the morning brief. But here, in a room that smelled like scorched bacon and warm plastic, Eliza was just another set of hands. She didn't come to be noticed. She came to observe quietly, respectfully, because the real conditions never made it into bullet point updates. Because soldiers didn't say what mattered during performance reviews. They said it here, over reheated trays and half-clean forks. The moment she answered that phone, everything shifted. Halverson hadn't touched his lunch since. His assistant had gone pale. One of the junior officers stared into his tablet, but hadn't moved for 5 minutes. Only Tamsin watched her differently now. Not because he understood everything, but because he understood enough to know what he'd missed. She didn't correct them, didn't explain. No one needed it. Not after that. Eliza Marlowe stood by the utility sink in the far end of the mess prep room, her sleeves rolled past the elbow. The desert sun poured in through the narrow ventilation slats, casting angled shadows over the rust-stained tiles. On her wrist, the black band with faded letters OEF, Echo Watch, caught the light just enough to draw attention from anyone who knew what to look for. Most didn't. Most never asked. The scar beneath it, long and silvery, had settled with time. It ran from mid-forearm to the base of her thumb, the kind of mark no first aid kit could have treated and no field report would ever mention by name. She wrung out the cloth and moved to wipe down the last table of the mid-morning rush. The mess hall would quiet for 15 minutes before the lunch wave arrived. And in that brief lull, Eliza always observed, always listened. At the Pentagon, her decisions moved carrier groups and shaped multi-theater operations. Results took years. Consequences were abstract, diffused through strategy memos and satellite feeds. But here, she could serve a hot meal. She could refill the coffee. She could offer a clean table to someone on the edge of sleep. And in those gestures unsung, unrecorded, she felt something that even a Joint Chiefs briefing couldn't provide: clarity. This was her 6th day at Camp Tellerman. 6 days of slipping into the rhythm of invisible efficiency. Same apron, same posture, same nameless silence. She had done this for 5 years now, at a different base each time. But this assignment wasn't random. She chose Tellerman because of Colonel Dean Halverson. She had reviewed his file weeks before arriving. 48 years old. No battlefield deployment. No citations for combat leadership. But a perfect service jacket. Commendations, polished reports, a sterling uniform presence. The kind of officer who advanced by appearing impeccable, not by being tested. His record showed a pattern: lateral transfers, executive roles, never enough exposure to failure to be blamed, never enough command time in theater to carry scars. He made himself indispensable on paper, and Eliza had seen plenty of those. But what made Halverson a liability wasn't his ambition. It was the way he hid his condescension beneath policy. He rarely barked, rarely accused. Instead, he dismissed with a smile, withheld with protocol, and redirected questions behind procedure. His tone always fell just short of actionable. And for 6 straight mornings, he hadn't looked her in the eye. He passed her at the steam line, left his tray without thanks, and never once asked her name. Not once. For someone like Eliza, someone trained to assess posture, tone, pattern, the omissions said more than words ever could. He didn't need to insult her. He didn't need to raise his voice, because he'd already decided the woman cleaning his table was irrelevant. She didn't flinch, didn't call attention, just watched, measured. Because this was why she still came back. Each year, 2 weeks. Not for charity, not for public relations, but to see the machine from the inside without filters, to witness what the metrics missed. And Halverson? He was what the reports couldn't detect. The kind of officer who looked sharp at a conference, but couldn't spot a leader standing 5 feet away because she wore an apron instead of brass. Eliza didn't need to teach him a lesson. That wasn't the point. But she did take note of every morning he failed to see, every nod he withheld, every moment he reinforced a culture that dismissed the unseen. The scar on her wrist didn't matter to him. The band didn't register, because he'd never been far enough forward to recognize either. That was the difference. Halverson operated in a world of forms and ceremony. She had operated where real decisions burned into skin. And one day soon, when the next round of appointments came through Washington, Eliza Marlowe would remember this week and the names that never looked up. The mess hall was between rushes. Most of the morning shift had cleared out, and only a few soldiers remained scattered across the long, varnished tables, refilling coffee, folding newspapers, exchanging tired jokes. Eliza Marlowe moved like she always did, quiet, measured, and almost invisible. She'd already wiped down most of the west half, checked the condiments, and was now smoothing out a crease on the plastic tray liner near the coffee urns when she heard the voice. It wasn't loud at first, just a few notches above casual conversation, but it carried especially in a room that had settled into post-breakfast calm. Colonel Dean Halverson had entered 10 minutes earlier with 3 other officers: Major Whitby, Lieutenant Colonel Rains, and Captain Anders. They weren't here for food, no trays, no coffee. Just notebooks, a tablet, and a folded issue of Military Review. They took the corner table near the hotline and leaned in as Halverson began. "The problem with all this diversity stuff," he said, voice steady but dismissive, "is that it's not about capability anymore. It's about optics." Rains gave a low chuckle. They just promoted someone out of the simulation division who never led a real-world op. And guess who sponsored that promotion? Halverson raised a brow. General Patricia Hayes. That name caught Eliza mid-step. Patricia Hayes had mentored her 20 years ago, back when Eliza was still shaking off the burn scars of Hellman, still limping through policy briefings and trying not to pass out from nerve damage. Hayes had been the one voice in a sea of senior brass who didn't treat her like a case file, who saw something worth building, not shelving. Halverson went on, flipping through his tablet like a man preparing for a TED Talk. "This is what happens when we promote based on headlines instead of history." He gestured toward Eliza, who, at that moment, was reaching for the bin of sugar packets, head down, focused on restocking. "That woman's been wiping tables all week. That's her capability, and someone's going to turn her into a poster general if we're not careful." One of the younger officers glanced toward Eliza, then back to Halverson, unsure if he was meant to laugh. Halverson just smirked. "She's been here 6 days," he added. "You'd think if she had actual experience, she wouldn't be volunteering for dining duty. Then again, that's the new army, right? Strategy by sympathy." What Halverson didn't realize, and what none of them had considered, was that Private Tamsin Ellery was standing just a few feet away. Tamsin had been pouring water into the dispenser near the cooler. She froze halfway through the motion, her grip tightening on the jug's handle. Her eyes flicked to Eliza, who had paused, only for a beat, before continuing her task as if nothing had been said. Tamsin's jaw flexed. She didn't speak, but she did glance toward the ceiling corner of the mess hall, where a small red light blinked next to the dome-shaped security camera. Everything had been recorded. Every word, every name. Back at the table, Halverson kept talking. His voice now dipped into that practiced tone, the kind of cadence designed to sound reasonable, even when soaked in bias. "I'm just saying," he continued, "we've replaced performance metrics with representation metrics, and it's bleeding into readiness. Units don't function on feelings." The others nodded. Anders added something about unit cohesion and discipline in legacy structures, parroting phrases that sounded borrowed from a conference slide deck. Eliza didn't respond. She didn't look up, but she noted everything. The order of the remarks. The way Halverson leaned back like a man confident in his immunity. The absence of challenge from his peers. The power of assumption spoken out loud, not in anger, but in control. She quietly walked behind the steam table and reached for the stainless tray of clean utensils. She'd been through worse, far worse. But this moment, this precise kind of leadership, was why she still took the field. Even in an apron. At the Pentagon, Eliza had studied men like Halverson, officers whose folders gleamed with polish, but whose influence eroded morale like water through limestone. They weren't loud. They weren't villains. They were systemic. And systems could be documented, could be flagged. She reached the supply closet just as Tamsin arrived beside her, empty pitcher in hand. For a second, neither spoke. Then softly, the young private said, "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, were you ever in uniform?" Eliza smiled faintly. "For a while." Tamsin hesitated. "They don't see it. What he just said, that wasn't right." Eliza's eyes met hers, calm, steady, and clear. They rarely do until it matters. Tamsin looked down, clenched her jaw, and nodded once before walking off to refill the coffee urns. Eliza turned, closing the supply door with a soft click. Behind her, Halverson's laughter rolled on unchecked, documented, and already on the internal review server. By 930, the mess hall had settled into its mid-morning rhythm. The early surge of soldiers had passed, and the clatter of trays gave way to the quieter hum of refills and second coffees. General Eliza Marlowe, wearing no insignia, no ribbon chest, moved with precision between the tables, restocking condiments, wiping surfaces, and refilling urns. Her sleeves were rolled back slightly, exposing the burn-scarred wrist and the faint black rubber band with OEF, Echo Watch, embossed in worn lettering. Colonel Halverson arrived with 3 other officers and claimed the center table directly in her path. Eliza didn't stop. She'd been listening to them all week. They spoke openly, now too comfortable to self-censor, too confident in the uniform's hierarchy. Halverson's voice carried farther than intended, sharp with certainty. "The problem with these diversity pushes," he said, "is that they prioritize background over capability." Major Bennett shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Respectfully, sir, some recent studies suggest diverse teams make better decisions, especially under complex pressure." Halverson waved a hand. "That's textbook fantasy. A repackaged excuse for soft policy. You think someone from a city housing project or a woman who's never seen live combat brings more to the table than trained operators?" Eliza continued wiping the nearby counter, methodical. Nothing in her posture changed, but her mind cataloged every word, every face. The real climate in the room revealed itself, not in memos, but in these unguarded conversations. Captain Ruiz, the youngest at the table, cleared his throat. "General Hayes would disagree, sir. She saw more action than most of the men in the 8th. "Patricia Hayes is an exception," Halverson said quickly. "And even then, let's be honest, her stars came faster than they should have. The brass needed a female general for the optics. Competent? Sure. But let's not pretend she earned them like a man would have." Eliza pressed down harder on the rag in her hand. Hayes had been her closest mentor for 14 years, a tactician with a combat record in Helmand and Mosul that outpaced entire battalions. Her stars had come at a cost, deaths she'd carried in silence, decisions no one second-guessed once the mission reports came in. "I just think we need to be cautious about assumptions," Bennett said quietly. "Sometimes people surprise you." Halverson leaned back, adopting the tone of a man explaining gravity to a child. "Here's some advice, Bennett. I've been in this uniform 20 years. You get a feel for people. What you see is what you get. That woman over there. He gestured toward Eliza without lowering his voice. She's been wiping tables all week. That's her level. Don't fool yourself into thinking there's some hidden war council inside a cafeteria apron. The other officers glanced toward her, some with pity, some with doubt, none with understanding. Eliza didn't pause. She'd heard worse in war zones and in conference rooms. I'm not saying we should consult food service for strategic input, Bennett replied carefully, but we should maybe stop assuming people are defined by the job we see them doing. That's how people get in trouble, Halverson countered. This illusion that everyone's secretly a genius waiting to be discovered. Most folks are doing what they're suited for. That woman is where she belongs. Captain Ruiz looked increasingly uneasy. Sir, maybe we should continue this somewhere more private? There's nothing being said here that shouldn't be heard. In fact, it's important our junior officers learn to evaluate people accurately. Leadership requires knowing who brings what to the table. That's when Eliza's phone buzzed. The sound was subtly muted, professional chime she'd deliberately chosen years ago so it wouldn't disturb meetings or formations. But in the lull of the mess hall, it was clear enough. All four men turned toward her. She glanced at the screen. A single icon flashed. The Pentagon. Urgent. Her heart didn't race, not outwardly, but she felt the shift, the cold clarity she'd learned long ago in Kandahar. This wasn't a check-in. This was real. She stepped back from the tray she'd been clearing, quietly tapped the button. Marlowe. A voice came through, immediate, steady, crisp, direct. General Marlowe, we've got a developing situation. Fleet 6 is requesting immediate escalation authorization. We're looking at coordinated signals from Cyprus and the Strait. Intel confirms movement. Situation room reconvenes in 10. She didn't blink. Tell comms I'm en route. Get Admiral Laskin on the line now and send the file to my red folder channel. Yes, ma'am. She ended the call, turned slightly. Halverson stared at her. So did the others. She looked him in the eye for the first time all week. I'm sorry, she said with complete calm, but this can't wait. Then, General Marlowe. For a second, nothing moved. No tray rattled. No one breathed. Private Tamsin, across the room near the ice machine, nearly dropped the jug she was refilling. A corporal near the door turned and stood at full attention by instinct alone. Colonel Halverson didn't speak. His jaw twitched, but his throat didn't find words. Eliza walked past their table without urgency. She didn't raise her voice, didn't explain. The room adjusted around her. Respect entered not through command but through presence. Outside, the heat had begun to rise again. The Nevada wind pushed sand across the compound's walkways. She stepped into it like she'd done 1,000 times before. But this time, finally, someone followed. If this moment meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories like Eliza's stories of quiet power, buried truth, and honor reclaimed. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. The air inside the mess hall hadn't moved since the call ended. The tray station stood idle, half-wiped. Private Tamsin, still gripping a carafe of orange juice, hadn't blinked. Eliza Marlowe lowered the phone without a sound. Then, calmly, deliberately, she walked back to the table where Colonel Halverson and his officers sat frozen mid-breath. I'm activating DEFCON 3, she said, voice level but unmistakable. Task Group 62 is to shift east by 40 nautical miles. No insertion of ground teams. We hold offshore and observe strictly ISR only. There was no note of hesitation, no glance for permission. She spoke with the rhythm of someone who had done this in crisis hundreds of times before. The kind of tone used in bunkered operations centers, under red lights, with the lives of thousands hanging in the balance. Captain Morrison tried to speak, but the words never made it out. Halverson opened his mouth as if to interrupt, but the weight of her tone crushed every protest before they formed. She continued. Forward liaison needs to be rerouted through Naval Command Sicily. Civilian alert protocols should remain at level 2. We're not escalating unless the indicators shift. Major Williams finally found his voice. General Marlowe, is this coming from 6th Fleet directly? She nodded once. Admiral Solano has confirmed the telemetry himself, and I've seen the SAT scans. No one questioned her further, because no one could. Eliza Marlowe wasn't explaining herself. She was issuing directive zones the Joint Chiefs would echo within the hour. This wasn't theory or tabletop exercise. This was the voice that cut through bureaucratic noise and made things happen on operational maps. And she was delivering those commands from behind a stainless steel coffee counter, her hands still faintly damp from wiping tables. She glanced at the security camera near the rear wall. The light on it blinked steady. Every second of what just unfolded was recorded. No one in that room could walk away from it not unchanged. Then, with military precision, she folded her phone, placed it on the counter, and stepped closer to the stunned group. "I'll be stepping out for a secure line shortly," she said quietly, "but there's something I need to say first." Halverson shifted in his seat, his face an awkward mask of confusion and retreat. He reached for his coffee as if grasping for control, but the cup stayed untouched. Eliza looked directly at him. "You didn't know who I was," she said, "and I didn't expect you to." She let that hang. Not bitter, not accusatory, just a fact laid bare. "But you could have treated me with dignity." She turned toward Morrison and Williams next. "We don't always get to choose who walks into our space, but we do get to choose whether we meet them with respect." Tamsin, still silent, had placed the juice pitcher down. She wasn't blinking anymore. She was listening. Eliza nodded once to her. "You asked me if I ever served?" Tamsin nodded back, almost afraid to move too much. Eliza spoke clearly now, her voice reaching the far edges of the room. "Lieutenant Eliza Marlowe, 519th Echo Watch, Helmand Province. I was the only survivor of Outpost 7 when it fell in 8, reassigned to Black Dune Ops. Promoted to command for the Nightglass campaign. Confirmed brigadier in 2014. Elevated to lieutenant general in 21. Silence deepened. "Every deployment I led, I did so knowing the faces of those I sent forward. Not just their ranks or files, their actual faces. Some came home, some didn't, but I remembered them." She exhaled, controlled, centered. "Sometimes, to remember what service really is, you have to get close enough to clean the table." She took a single step back, posture still crisp. "I don't want recognition," she said. "I want accountability. In environments where people, regardless of title, don't have to prove they belong just to be treated with decency." Halverson looked away. He didn't apologize. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Because in that moment, every ounce of authority in the room had shifted to the woman who minutes earlier was dismissed as invisible, and now stood as the highest-ranking officer within 200 miles. Eliza gave one last glance toward the silent camera on the wall. Then, without waiting for ceremony or questions, she walked toward the door, pulled open the latch with practiced ease, and stepped into the bright white heat of the desert sun. Inside, no one spoke. They weren't sure what they were supposed to do next, because whatever they thought they knew about chain of command had just been rewritten. By mid-afternoon, word had spread across the entire base. The woman in the apron wasn't a volunteer. She was General Eliza Marlowe, head of Strategic Command for the Joint Special Operations Directorate. The second call hadn't just exposed her identity. It had rewritten how everyone saw the week that came before it. Footage from the mess hall camera had already been pulled. There, in clear audio, was Halverson's voice, dismissing women, mocking General Hayes, and calling a 3-star general nothing more than cafeteria staff. It wasn't just inappropriate. It was untenable. Major General Amari Heath, the base commander, scheduled a closed-door meeting with Eliza that same evening. He didn't salute when she walked in. He stood. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology and a report of everything that's happened since that call." Eliza didn't raise her voice, didn't ask for discipline or punishment. She came with a folder of proposals, a review of internal communications culture, a directive for anonymous reporting from non-combat personnel, and a voluntary mentoring initiative connecting command-level officers with junior enlisted women. Heath read every page. "These aren't policy changes, ma'am. They're structural repairs." Eliza nodded. "I know, but it has to start somewhere." By the end of the week, Colonel Halverson was reassigned to logistics and procurement in Anchorage, a move that came with no reprimand but also no upward path. His career was over without anyone having to say it aloud. As for Private Tamsin, she filed her formal request that same night to transfer into officer training. She attached a personal statement, citing leadership she had observed firsthand, even if she didn't know the name at the time. The final line read, "Because of her, I know what real command looks like." When Eliza saw it, she didn't respond officially. But 2 weeks later, a one-on-one tactical mentorship slot opened up. The application had only one name pre-approved. 2 years later, Pentagon, East Auditorium. Early morning. A 4-star pin glinted under white lights. General Eliza Marlowe stood at the podium, quiet as ever. Reporters filled the back rows. Brass lined the front, yet the room felt smaller than the one she'd commanded with a single word in a desert mess hall. She didn't start with her record, or with gratitude. She began with this. The rank doesn't matter, the room does, and how we treat people inside it. There was no applause, pause. She wasn't here for the noise. Down near the aisle, Sergeant Tamsin wore a fresh uniform. Her face was older now, calmer. She had orders to deploy to Stuttgart within the month, but she'd requested leave to be here. When Eliza stepped off the stage, she spotted Tamsin first. A small nod passed between them. Nothing more. Until a young soldier, barely 19, approached Tamsin shyly. "My sister wants to serve because of her," the soldier said, glancing toward Eliza. Tamsin smiled. "Then tell her this. It doesn't matter where she starts. She deserves to be seen." The young soldier nodded, as if absorbing a truth no training manual ever printed. And Eliza? She walked out of the auditorium without cameras following. No entourage, no marching band. Just one more quiet exit for a woman who had already taught an entire base and, now a new generation how to look closer. Not at medals. Not at rank. But at character. If this story moved you, subscribe for more true accounts of dignity, quiet leadership, and earned recognition. Thank you for being here. And to all who serve, seen or unseen, we see you now.